But what actually got me on this particular phase of my research was a trip that I made with David and others to Egypt in 2004. And we went to the Temple of Luxor, and I don't know if David or Bart noticed, but occasionally I would wander off and start to look at things and ignored the Egyptologist who was supposedly telling us about this ancient culture. I was looking at very, very precise granite objects. And when you go to the Temple of Dendera, it's immediately striking in that what we have are these giant statues, and they are made out of solid granite. The only separate piece from the statue is the plinth or the base that some of them are set on. And you would think a statue is a sculpture. And I'm here to tell you that these statues are not necessarily sculptures, but they are engineered and finely crafted products. And what we see is, if you look at the circle, that is a true circle. And just looking at the right cheek, what we have is something that's quite remarkable for any machinist, because when you look at a radius, but it's not a two-dimensional object. This is a three-dimensional object. And so what they had done is created a precise radius that when you look at it in 2D, it's a precise radius, but it's moving in 3 dimensions. So it's moving X, Y, and Z. How do they do that? And it's the same on the other side. Now, going through the rest of the statue, we see that there are, again, we're working with the circle protocol, and we have these correspondences with the grid. Not just there. We have the eyelid, the lower eye, the upper eyelid, the top of the eyelid, the mouth, and all the circular geometry is tangent with the correspondence with the grid. And you see the points on the grid? I know we've got some machinists in the room, and there's one sitting over there, another one there, another one here. There's all kinds of folks who are actually keying into this because they understand that this stuff isn't done just blindly going at a piece with a hammer and chisel. Now let's look at the geometry of the profile. And you can see again that we have the circle protocol. Everything is kind of designed like it was, it's almost like it was designed in a computer graphics program, just using a series of circles or spheroids and blending everything together to come up with this perfect geometry. Now the jaw lines, it's so you have like when you're looking at the jaw line, you're looking at a radius from the front, and you're also looking at a radius from the side, which give you three-dimensional perfection in both axes. So then I start to look at the statue and say, okay, well, you know, a lot of times you can note whether it's the action of a machine by the marks that the machine makes. And are there tool marks? Is there a tool path? And there are several statues where those mistakes are still in the statue. And you can see on this particular one that there are what I would consider to be feed lines where a tool has actually passed along the upper lip down to the mouth and has left marks. The marks are still there. Can everybody see that? Is it visible to everybody? on a Ramsey statue at Karnak, which I took with a telephoto lens, and it's almost like a wireframe photograph, wireframe drawing with the step over from one pass to another, but it comes right down the side of the face, and above the eyebrows there's even indents where the tool paused above the eyebrow. Yes, granite is an igneous rock, and it has a lot. This particular granite has 55% silicon quartz crystal, so it's much harder than granite. And you can use a stainless or a steel tool to chisel away granite, limestone. But if you're going to work on granite, you have to, carbide, you can crush the material and remove it that way, but actually doing some really fine detailing and cutting, you need diamond tools. And there's evidence that they actually use rotating diamond tools to cut some of their artifacts.
I've heard many people suggest that because sculptors like Michelangelo could create artwork as incredible as the statue of David, then surely this is proof that artists can do anything. I've been to Florence and I've seen David. It's a profoundly beautiful achievement, but it's just not the same thing as the mechanical precision and symmetry reflected in the Ramsey statues. David is utterly and emotionally human in its lack of symmetry, whereas Ramsey appears to be so inhuman or perhaps beyond human because of its symmetry. And what's more, it's made out of granite. This substance is orders of magnitude more difficult to work in than marble, and modern sculptors understand this. The flares, angles, ridges, and curves on this piece all appear flawless. They are made entirely smooth and well polished, and the entire massive body seems to be utterly symmetrical and balanced. Was this made by hand, do you think, with pounding stones and copper chisels? I just can't imagine how. To my mind, this must be the result of some very advanced tools, along with significant mechanical assistance and guidance.
All the same measurement. You know how challenging is this? Pillars that's over 5.5 meters. Where do you find 16 pillars? 16 pieces that you can make 16 pillars out of. The crown is a single solid piece with the pillar, not like the Roman pillars.
Stacked up.
Yeah. The pillars in the pyramid structures are single solid piece. That palm-shaped pillar is very, very challenging. Of course, the piece itself was as big as the width of the crown, of the palm, of the crown, of the pillar. And then the base of it is wide. And then it keeps going narrower like this. And then the pillar, this crown is on top of it. Very, very, very challenging.
The fact is that it wasn't until after we had begun our own modern voyage down the path of precision that we even had the capability to notice and accurately measure ancient forms of precision, or to even appreciate the sophistication of the manufacturing techniques that were required to achieve it. This evidence has been sitting in front of humanity for thousands of years, like some sort of coded message sent down through time, but it's one that we've only relatively recently developed the capability to read. The examples take the form of saw cuts and machining marks, and tube drill holes and cores, striations and lines of varying fineness that indicate degrees of machining. Many of the objects with such marks come from sites known to exist during the Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt, or from other parts of the world that also had an equivalent Bronze Age technology, typically with no access to iron or steel tools. The tools that are found that come from these periods are primitive hand tools, flint knives, copper or bronze chisels, adzes, or stone pounders. These do not produce machining marks, and clearly none of them were mechanized or powered. What's more, the Old Kingdom was not thought to have had access to the wheel, yet in many Old Kingdom locations we can see the evidence for precise and powerful tools that certainly operated on principles involving the wheel and that seem to have cut through incredibly tough material like granite, diorite or basalt with seeming ease. Some of these machining marks left consistent and measurable arcs that we can use to estimate the saw's size. And these tools must have been truly monstrous. They must also have been powered by some mechanism. Perhaps my favourite example of what must have been just a huge circular saw, or perhaps a swing saw, is found at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Sir. This megalithic block of basalt that sits in front of one of the several pyramids on that site looks much like many others that are found here, yet a close examination reveals some astonishing characteristics. The top of this block, although weathered from millennia in the desert, has clearly been cut by a blade that has a very distinctive circular arc to it. It left obvious striations and grooves in its passing, indicating a rapid rate of cutting through this very hard material, and a bit of water poured over the block shows these marks very clearly. The block appears to have not been cut all the way through, something that we are very fortunate to have evidence for, as it also appears to have been a remarkably thin edge, only a few millimeters of material, as evidenced by the lip that is left on the edge of this block. Look at the arc to the saw and just try to imagine the diameter of the tool. If it was indeed a circular saw, it may have been as much as 8 or 9 meters or 25 feet or more in diameter. Some saw cuts that left precise arcs have been estimated by Christopher Dunn to have been made with saws up to 11 meters in diameter, which is over 30 feet. Primitive hand tools made from copper indeed. I think this particular block was never quite finished, and it seems likely to me that many of the other basalt blocks that form part of the megalithic floors and walls on this site were likely cut in a similar fashion, and then they were polished to an astonishing level of flatness, which removed the grooves and the striation marks from the cut. These types of large diameter saws were also used on many other blocks at Abu Sir, and we see their markings in many other places. At Giza and on other sites, we have actual saw cuts that were started and not finished. The basalt floor to the east of the Great Pyramid has several such marks made into it. When it comes to these types of boxes, these giant saws were obviously also used to cut the lids from the same original block of stone that the boxes themselves were shaped from. And in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there is what's known as the unfinished box. It has a huge saw cut showing how the lid was being removed from the back of the stone block. Just as a reminder, using circular saws like this isn't the typical way any civilization quarries stone, right up until we get into the modern mechanized age. In these days, we do indeed use huge circular saws or swing saws or other types of mechanized saws in order to cut granite, but until barely 100 years ago, the technique used in the field to cut through granite was far different and far more primitive. We see these primitive quarrying marks everywhere, as the ancient Egyptian stone monuments have been used as quarries for millennia now. Small hollows are first carved into the rock, usually with steel chisels, and it forms something that looks kind of like a dashed line. You'll see this all over Egyptian sites and on many of the blocks. After this line is carved, wood is inserted into these gaps, and then the wood is wet. The wood expands, the block cracks, hopefully it cracks along the quarry line itself, and there you go, you have yourself a piece of granite. The circular saw marks that have quite clearly been used to cut large blocks of stone don't match any technique known from the ancient world, but they certainly seem to indicate some form of mechanized capability, much like our own. When we see these marks, there is really no mainstream explanation for how they were made in antiquity, other than with the idea of some form of two-man copper or bronze saw being pushed back and forth by a couple of guys using sand or some other abrasive material to slowly, very slowly, grind through the stone. Although this technique will indeed eventually wear away the stone, it's more of a grinding motion than a cutting mechanism, and there are really several problems with the idea that this type of saw made these types of marks. Firstly, the obvious one, it doesn't leave anything like the marks that we find on blocks like the one at Abu Sir, as it's a grinding process, not a cutting process like we see on this block. These marks are all consistent in terms of their radius. This tool wasn't moved around very much in relation to the block. Everything seems to have been held very firmly as the saw progressed through the cut. The very tiny width of the blade, as indicated by the lip at the edge of this cut, makes it nothing short of impossible that such a saw could have been made from a soft material like copper or bronze and still manage to cut through basalt. Then there's the obvious problems. It would simply take far too long to grind through all of these blocks in this way. And many of the blocks that seem to have been cut in this manner are way, way too large to have been done by hand with primitive tools like copper saws. The most befuddling evidence for some form of advanced machining comes from a notorious slab of granite that's found at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Rawash. It has the same circular saw marks, these circular grooves that we saw on the basalt block at Abu Sir, but it also seems to have been subjected to at least a two-stage machining process. The saw has been used to cut horizontally into the block as we're viewing it in this footage, and it left the same saw cut marks as we saw on the block at Abu Sir. However, it also has a machined lip that's been cut vertically into this cut surface, as if a very large circular saw or wheel was used to cut just a small amount out vertically, shown by this slight yet consistent concave arc to this second cut. This is a very complex mechanical signature. It's not something that could have been made with hand tools, and frankly it bends my mind a little bit trying to imagine just how this series of cuts were made. Christopher Dunn has made an excellent study of this block at Abu Rawash, along with the other evidence for mega machines in his book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. These tube drills have also been used to make some very complex objects, like this one, which is a hole, a tube drill hole, that's been drilled into a core from a larger tube drill, which is also housed in a museum. This block that's being shown by Yusuf Ayawan was, at least last time we saw it, located at Giza. It's another example of a hole drilled into a larger piece that may actually be something from another tube drill. But sadly, this block is now missing. It's no longer at Giza, at least we couldn't find it. And this is an all too common occurrence for evidence that doesn't really fit the mainstream narrative. Why then do we find clear evidence for overcuts in so many objects and slabs? We find these overcuts on the precision statues of ancient Egypt. You can find these overcuts under the arms or at the edge of the seat. You also tend to see tube drill holes drilled between the feet. There are other machining marks that seem to indicate some form of powerful industrial process was used to shape and finish the stone. One of the best examples is this remarkable slab tucked away in a corner at Abu Sir that has many such markings on it. Blades or saws have dipped into the material and then backed out, and cuts have been adjusted. I can only describe this block as having been machined. It's very flat, its corners and angles are very precise, and there are power tool markings all over it that seem almost delicate in their application. Even the end of this slab appears to have been cut through, and then you can see where the stone was broken away. And just look at the flatness of the surfaces and the sharpness of the angles. I really hope this slab is left where it is. It seems small enough that it could be relatively easily carried away, and I'm looking forward to examining it one more time when we visit Abu Sir again later this year. Then, lastly, we have the actual polishing stage that brings the material to the point of reflecting light. Even while covered in dust, the perfect nature of the finish on these boxes really is remarkable, particularly in some of the interior spaces in the boxes, which appear to have been polished almost perfectly. You can see the markings left by what appear to be liquid drops on the underside of the lid here.
A liquid, some kind of liquid. So the liquid leaks down here and then forms these lines with drops.
Now, this isn't a varnish or a polish, at least as not as we know them, and many people have suggested this to me. That's not what this is, because these liquid pooling marks that are shown here, they are noticeably smoother than the surrounding material. This is not a process nor a chemical that we know of. Our granite blocks and the slabs that we use are polished with mechanical devices and varying levels of grit before they're shipped to your house and installed as a kitchen counter. Academics claim that this polishing was done simply by rubbing sand and rocks onto the surface. While this seems fairly ridiculous, this might actually be a plausible technique for polishing a flat surface, never mind how you got the surface flat in the first place. But even if it took years to achieve, it just isn't realistic when you consider the vast array of non-flat surfaces. There are many complex, irregular surfaces that are on these objects that have been polished just as well as the flat parts. It's not just the boxes that are polished. We also see a very fine degree of finishing in evidence on many statues. Plenty of these are housed today in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and many of them are made from types of stone that are even harder than granite. Note how every surface is polished, and in some cases the reflection of light is used to emphasize features, like the rib cage on this statue, or the chest of this seated figure.
The uncommon precision is actually throughout all of Egypt. It's not just in Luxor on the statue, but even in the Serapeum, where you have the perfection of these granite boxes. And I think some of you may have seen these images before, but the granite boxes in the Serapeum, there's over 20 of them, and the inside surfaces of the boxes are within, I would say, at least over a 12-inch length within less than a half a thousandths. The gauge I was using was accurate to within 1/10,000th of an inch. And so that particular gauge, you couldn't see any light shining through it. And as you can see, the square, that's a precision tool maker square with a 14-inch blade. And there is no light shining through. It's pressed flat against the lid, and look at the reflection on the underside of the lid and the reflection down the length of the blade. There is no aberrations, or it's a true reflection. It's a perfectly flat surface. And so the question is, well, how did they do that? How do Egyptologists explain this?
The writing is, without fail, always used to date the sites and to date the objects that are found on the sites, despite in many cases there being a huge disparity in technology levels. How could anyone say that these poorly made scratches into this incredible box at the Serapeum were made by the same people that made the box itself? Yet this is exactly how we date and relate this site and its objects. At the Serapeum, this box is considered to be the most valuable because it has writing on it. I would prefer to call this what it is, a priceless, high-technology, ancient object that was inherited and then vandalized with a chisel by a later and far less capable ancient culture. Maybe it's high time that we opened our eyes and used some of our own high-technology capability in order to reevaluate these ancient places, so that we might get just a few steps closer to the truth. Using a calibrated and expensive precision straight edge, manufacturing engineer Chris Dunn has measured the inside surfaces of a couple of these boxes to be precisely and absolutely flat, to within 1/20th the width of a human hair, or 0.0001 inches, which is the limit of his straight edge. Wherever he moved the straight edge over the flat, mirror-like interior walls of the box, light did not pass underneath it, which it would have if the surface was not perfectly flat. Using a precision square, calibrated to within 5/100,000ths of an inch, or 0.00005 inches, he found the inside faces of the boxes to not only be perfectly square and parallel to each other, but also perfectly square relative to the lid. This is a profound achievement. Remember that this all has been done in massive single-piece granite boxes. These aren't separate pieces of granite that are then bolted together, which is how we might construct something like this today. And one single mistake anywhere would mean that you need to change the entire geometry of the box. The complexity and difficulty of getting this feat perfectly correct, particularly in faces up to 10 feet apart, really can't be overstated. Now, not only was this done perfectly for one box, it appears to be a feat repeated time and time again across many of these boxes. The only other reason that such precision would be created in an object would be that the tools that are used to create it are so precise that they are incapable of producing anything less than precision. With either scenario, we are looking at a higher civilization in prehistory than what is currently accepted. To me, the implications are staggering. This is why I believe that these artifacts that I have measured in Egypt are the smoking gun that proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that a higher civilization than what we have been taught existed in ancient Egypt. The evidence is cut into the stone." End quote. Handheld precision tools would be a start, but more modern, laser-based metrology tools could be used to determine the dimensions and tolerances over the entire surface of these artifacts. High-definition LiDAR-based 3D scanning, or the emerging field of hyperspectral imaging, could be used to dramatically advance our understanding of the exact nature of precision and the construction methods that were used to manufacture boxes like these. Not only boxes, but these techniques could and should be used to model and study many of the precision objects and architecture that are found around the world. The range of shapes and materials used in the manufacture of these jars and vases is both wide and varied. Some are tiny, almost as if their makers were teasing us with their capability, and some are quite large, but they all seem to display a frankly astonishing degree of symmetry and precision. This jar is one of my favourites, and it seems to have been so precisely made and so well balanced that it can stand upright on its tiny base, almost like an egg standing up on its tip. Many jars seem to be made this way, and while I've not had the privilege of handling them directly in order to test this, I'd like to see anyone try and make these by hand with copper chisels and the known techniques of ancient Egypt. All I can say is good luck. While some vases or jars seem very solid, others are almost ridiculously thin, to the point of transparency, like these examples. In some cases, like this vase that has suffered some damage, we can get an idea of just how thin this material is. Shaping and carving out the inside angles and the inside cavities of these jars, some through very long and narrow necks, and then keeping the material thickness consistent and accurate, is an extraordinarily difficult challenge when working in very hard stone. Quoting Petrie from his book, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, quote, "The principle of rotating the tool was, for smaller objects, abandoned in favour of rotating the work, and the lathe appears to have been as familiar an instrument in the 4th dynasty as it is in modern workshops. The diorite bowls and vases of the Old Kingdom are frequently met with and show great technical skill. One piece found at Giza, number 14, shows that the method employed was true turning and not any process of grinding, since the bowl has been knocked off of its centering, recentered imperfectly, and the old turning not quite turned out. Thus there are two surfaces belonging to different centerings and meeting in a cusp. Such an appearance could not be produced by any grinding or rubbing process which pressed on the surface." End quote. Either we're completely, woefully incorrect about the capabilities and the tools of the early dynastic Egyptians, and they did in fact have advanced capabilities that rival our own, and they were able to make these precision objects. Or we're wrong in saying that they created them at all. To insist that both statements are true, that the dynastic Egyptians both made all of these objects and did so with the primitive tools of the Bronze Age, is logically inconsistent, and it makes no sense at all. Yet this contradiction is exactly the ground that our mainstream academic Egyptologists and archaeologists choose to occupy. By acknowledging that there's a degree of sophistication and high technology evident in these artifacts, then you're acknowledging that our current story for them just doesn't make any sense. Perhaps this is why it seems to be so difficult to get our academics' attention on this issue, as it leads to some very confronting questions for the orthodox story of history.
On this discussion board, I was accused of being a lone voice shouting into the wilderness, and nobody was listening. And this was basically an article that focused on some of the artifacts in the Peter Museum, which you all know of, it's down the road. And so that has changed. Now there are thousands of engineers going through Egypt. I have taken dozens of engineers myself. I've been around dozens of engineers in Egypt coming from all over the world, and they are definitely engaged. They see these artifacts through the same eyes I'm looking through, with the same background, and they are agreeing. So when it comes to the concept of peer review, I'm very happy that my work has resonated with my peers, which are actually technologists, those who actually do the work. And if we were to say, okay, let's build a pyramid power plant today, we probably won't be hiring any Egyptologists to help us. So when I proposed the theory of the Great Pyramid as a power plant, I said I'm not adamantly adhering to any one proposition. The possibilities may be numerous. This is my interpretation. This is how I think it worked. This is the evidence that I used to formulate that opinion. And if somebody has a different interpretation, they want to present it, then they should. So essentially and fundamentally, the Earth is the driver of the Giza power plant. It is a dynamic body and supports civilization, demand for fuel, and has done it for centuries. The Great Pyramid responds to the Earth's energies, both mechanically and electrically. And the interesting thing is that my initial observation was that because of the acoustic qualities of the Great Pyramid, its dimensions and its relationship as an integer to the Earth's dimensions, in that it's harmonically coupled mechanically, I was focusing more on the mechanical energy, and when I made my interpretation, I thought that if there was any electrical activity, then that would be related to the quartz in the granite in the King's Chamber. But why would somebody actually even think that a pile of rocks could be a power plant? The source of the energy is the Earth. Now, the ascending passage is related to the movement of sound within the Grand Gallery. But what happened was that they had what I call a resonant chamber, the King's Chamber, that was forced to vibrate, and it vibrated at a high energy level. Hydrogen was created in the Queen's Chamber. I call that the reaction chamber. And there's evidence to support that particular theory, in that there are residual substances that support that, and also just the function of the entire system. So with hydrogen being generated in the Grand Gallery, what you have is a series of resonators that gather the earth energies coming through the pyramid, converts that energy to airborne sound, which is then focused into the King's Chamber, causing the granite to move significantly. So in the Queen's Chamber, the shafts terminated 5 inches to the inside of the wall. So I proposed that there were 2 fluids, 2 chemicals that came together in that chamber, and there was a reaction that boiled off hydrogen. Now, the evidence to prove that or to support that is the essentially that 5-inch left, or that piece that wasn't cut out. If you know the head pressure of a shaft containing a fluid, then you have a certain flow or percolation rate through the granite membrane. This is known science. And so if you have a shaft that's totally, it's full, you've got on one side dilute hydrochloric acid, and on the north side you have hydrated zinc. When they come together, then you have hydrogen. I kind of demonstrated that on Ancient Aliens. I don't know if anybody saw it, but...
Engineer Chris Dunn believes the answer can be found by further examination of the shafts in what some call the Queen's Chamber, where traces of zinc and hydrochloric acid have been discovered.
I believe the chemical coming in through the northern shaft was hydrated zinc, and the other chemical coming through the southern shaft and into the chamber was dilute hydrochloric acid. These are actually seen on the chamber walls.
Dunn suggests that the two chemicals were poured down through the shafts and then mixed together inside the Queen's Chamber, triggering combustion.
This vessel represents the Queen's Chamber. Into the tubes we're going to pour hydrated zinc and then hydrochloric acid. When you bring these two liquids together and a chemical reaction occurs, and a product of that chemical reaction is hydrogen. And you can see the vapor, the hydrogen, escaping through the chimney. And there you have the reaction.
Dunn speculates that the hydrogen gas traveled from the Queen's Chamber into the King's Chamber. Then, the vibrations from the subterranean pool energized the hydrogen atoms into a microwave energy beam.
The evidence that indicates the use of hydrogen can be found in the King's Chamber. There is a shaft in the King's Chamber that has dimensions of 8.4 by 4.8, which would be suitable for a waveguide for a maser, or microwave amplification through stimulated emission radiation. And from there, we can actually propose many different ideas of what they did with it. So I revised the drawing again. This is typical engineering. It's not like, oh, I've changed my mind. No, my mind was changed when more evidence came. And using the scientific method, if new evidence shows up, you have to adjust your theory a little bit, or if you can't adjust it, then the theory has to be thrown out. And so, I'm just saying, hey, I got to change my drawing, and everything will work. So so this is the new one, where the chemicals are fed from the outside, and then they flow into the Queen's Chamber, and that's where they're mixed. Acoustics in the Great Pyramid have been noted for many years. It's one of the features that people are constantly talking about when they go to Egypt and they go into the King's Chamber. They remark about it. It has tremendous resonance in there. Now, as far as the features in the King's Chamber to support the idea that a hydrogen maser was active in that space is a waveguide in the north wall, which is 8.4 inches wide, 4.8 inches high, and then a microwave antenna in the south wall. And you can see them both when you go to Egypt. If you go with Andy and his group, or Hugh and his group, then as far as this microwave horn antenna, there is a fan in there now. Ganton Brink had installed it in the 90s. And oh, there it is. And then there's the northern shaft. Now, one of the marvelous features of the King's Chamber complex is that it is mechanically isolated from the surrounding bedrock. So there is a gap all the way around it. Danley in 1995, or 1996, he was doing some sounding in the King's Chamber, and he remarked that he thought that the floor even was suspended on nodes like an egg carton or something like that, but that the vibration or there was no damping. So the elimination of damping was key in order for the power plant to work. So you have the a situation where sound energy comes through the King's Chamber, vibrates the granite. The granite moves and it releases tremendous amount of electromagnetic energy. There is a signal, microwave signal, coming through the northern shaft, and that actually stimulates emission in the hydrogen, the excited hydrogen, that then flows through the southern shaft. That's just a simple overview. And I wrote Blending Science and Music. The ancient Egyptians had tuned their power plant to a natural harmonic of the Earth's vibration, which is predominantly a function of the tidal energy induced by the gravitational effects the moon has on the Earth. Resonating with the life force of Mother Earth, the Great Pyramid of Giza quickened and focused a pulse and transduced it into clean, plentiful energy. So, in effect, the Great Pyramid was designed like a huge musical instrument and functioned very well. And so what they found was this extra space, which was above the Grand Gallery, and that right after that was found, and I get a call from Eric, and hey, Chris, I said, yeah, what? He said, that new discovery by the Scan Pyramid mission, I know what that is. And I'm like, you know what it is? We don't even have really good data on it. You know, the thing's horizontal, it's on an angle, the resolution is very, very low. You know, until we can get good hard physical measures, do we really know what we've got? And he goes, no, it's a space, and it's really necessary for your power plant to work. And I'm like, okay, this is a Rolls-Royce engineer. He knows more than me about electrical stuff. So I said, okay, I'll buy it. What is it? He said, it's a preamp. In fact, if you didn't have it, then your theory on the Giza power plant probably won't work. And for that to work, all you would need is for it to be filled with quartz sand. And if it was filled with quartz sand, and if there were connectors to the northern shaft, then you would have a preamp, a functional preamp. And I went, well, I'm not going to argue with him. Okay, that sounds very exciting. Where do we go with it? And he says, well, we need to go to Egypt. I said, well, I happen to be going next March. Do you want to go? Yep, I want to go. So he went along with me in March on a techno tour, and had a great time. And then the other research that came up was, study reveals Great Pyramid of Giza can focus electromagnetic energy. And I was like, uh-huh. And I was getting emails from people, hey, Chris, you know, it looks like you were right, looks like you were right. And it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not everything. And, you know, in terms of proving the Giza power plant, there's a lot more to go through in order to really nail that down. Eric had been involved with, he's involved with Purdue University in Lafayette. They have a power generation department, and there was a student there who was working on an acoustic engine. And working with her, and I asked him before I put this PowerPoint presentation together, can I share any of the information? And right now it's proprietary, so I can't. But anecdotally, I can tell you that as he was working with her, and the design of the system that she had, if you had taken all the elements of the Great Pyramid and arranged them in a different way, you would find them in her machine. And even some of the ratios and proportions he advised her on, it was actually inspired by the Great Pyramid. So he presented an article to the to American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. He presented that in August of this year, and in this article he presented a theory that you could actually build an acoustic engine inside a mountain to draw off energy.
In the Sharplanina mountain range in Kosovo, an ancient device resembling a transformer was discovered. This device was dated by analysts to be at least 20,000 years old, refuting any notion that the object could have been made recently. The wires of the transformer are made of a non-corrosive copper. The way in which the copper wires wrap around the stone is similar to a toroidal inductor, which is a component used in electronic circuits. The type of rock that this transformer is carved from is limestone. The creators of this device may have inserted the transformer into a limestone insulator to hold it and isolate the electrical current. There are holes carved into the front of the insulator, which may have been used for holding it on something like a pedestal. The limestone insulator and the transformer itself appear to have been crushed from pressure of some type, causing the insulator to crack and the wires to be bent and frayed. The top portion of the transformer was cracked also, and the insulator was pushed into the transformer. The device seems to be held together by copper wires, which run through the entire insulator, since you can observe wires protruding from the rock in some spots. These wires would have held the limestone together after it was crushed, much like how rebar can hold together damaged concrete. The backside of the insulator has 4 symmetrical plug holes, which would have served as the openings that wires could be plugged into. The rims around each of these holes are also made of a non-corrosive copper. Modern copper is known to corrode quickly when it is not bound to other materials, such as zinc or tin. The material used to make this device is nearly pure copper, yet it has not corroded. Ancient people were somehow capable of altering metals, such as iron, to prevent them from corroding without combining them with other types of metals. Since this object is supposedly 20,000 years old and has not corroded, it indicates that the copper in this object was also altered in some way to prevent corrosion. Since ancient people had apparently been capable of creating complex transformers, then it is safe to assume that they must have had other types of technology that required electrical energy. An artifact resembling an outlet plug was found encased in a rock in Texas. There are 3 metal prongs extending from the rock. The plug also has an insulator base, which is a requirement for outlet plugs to function. The rock that this plug was encased in was dated to be at least 100,000 years old, and is composed of granite, quartz, and feldspar. There is no evidence of the plug having been glued or welded into the stone, which it would need to be in order for it to stay in place if it had been planted into the rock recently. The plug is very similar to a 3-pronged Type M outlet plug used only in countries far from the United States, including South Africa, Singapore, and India. Since the object is encased in rock, it is generally assumed that the plug must be far older than a modern one. It would be essentially impossible for a modern plug of this type or any other to have become embedded in a granite stone in the United States. The wedge of Aiud is another example of an ancient machine component. This object was discovered near the city of Aiud in Romania, buried over 30 feet deep, and found alongside mastodon bones underground, making it an estimated age of 10,000 years old. The wedge of Aiud is remarkable due to its composition of 90% aluminum. Aluminum cannot be extracted from ores without the usage of smelting and complex machinery. This object appears to be an attachment for a larger piece of equipment, possibly a standard excavator or a bucket wheel excavator. It could not have come from a modern excavator, however, since aluminum alloys are not used to make excavator attachments. Alloy steel is the material that modern attachments are made from. For those who adhere to only conventional explanations, there are no answers as to who had made this object, how it was constructed, or why it was buried over 30 feet deep. An unnatural piece of nearly pure aluminum was found embedded in a piece of coal in Vladivostok, Russia. X-ray diffraction was used on the object, and it was determined that it was composed of 96 to 98% aluminum and 2 to 4% magnesium. This concentration is even more pure than the wedge of Aiud, and this object should have been even older since it was encased in coal. This object appears to be a broken piece of a linear gear rack, which is a component often used in advanced machinery. No soot from torches or torch remnants have been found in these temples, yet they go into very deep, dark locations. No evidence of soot has been found in the Malta or Turkey underground complexes, nor in the carved caves of China, nor in the ancient temples in Indonesia, or in the pyramids in Egypt. The ankh is another symbol often depicted in ancient Egyptian stone carvings. This shape is nearly identical to another type of light-emitting device that Nikola Tesla had created, called the electric oscillator. The Jed pillar, claimed to represent the backbone of Osiris, is much more similar to an insulator used on power systems.
It's thanks to meeting this man, Senior Juan Navarro, of the Paracas History Museum, that I saw my first elongated skulls for the very first time. And this, coming from a medicine biological background, caused my curiosity to be heightened when I actually got to see them in person. It's one thing to see them on television or to see photographs, but to physically be in the presence of them caused me to look through the academic records, and the responses and answers I got from academia were quite unsatisfactory. So here, for example, we see the standard practices of how cranial deformation was done. In this case, it's called cradle headboarding, and this was done very soon after a child was born, again of the nobility, and it was a way over the course of time to be able to tell the difference between someone of common heritage and someone of noble heritage. So this was done, cradle headboarding, by many different cultures. Very curious is that basically all of them are found along this line, which says the Kapaknyan, which means the royal road. And it's along this line we find almost all of the ancient megalithic structures in Peru. So there's a direct relationship between megalithic structures and elongated skulls. Now it gets incredibly curious, because we're still along this energetic path, and here, close to Cusco, are the remains of this mummified so-called baby that theoretically died at 2 years old 800 years ago. Its skull is the size of its torso. So there's no way that this is cranial deformation. This is genetics. Again, the skull, the size of the torso. And this depicts that, as you can see. You can also see the neck is longer than normal. And this baby, called Waiki, has one set of ribs fewer than what we have. Now, when we look at the top of the skull, this is called the fontanelle. And the fontanelle normally closes by 2 years of age. But this is where other genetic anomalies come into play with the Wyke skeleton. Look at the skull, look at the face. The eye sockets are larger than normal and they're vertically longer. So that is not the depiction of a normal human baby. As well, it has permanent molars. So a so-called 2-year-old baby has the molars of a 10 or 12-year-old. So what I'm starting to insinuate is this is not Homo sapiens sapiens. And here you can easily tell the difference between a very large elongated skull on the right with the forehead protuberance and then some normal looking skulls on the left, but the one on the left closest to the right in that group is quite a bit larger than the others. In a very obscure little museum, these 3 mummies were on display, but are now back in storage. And the reason for that will be quite obvious. Look at this mummified baby, supposedly 5 years old at the time of death. The head is the size of the torso. So this is not an example of cranial deformation. This is genetics. And this is just to focus on the shape of the head. The back you can see is rounded and it's very complex in terms of curvature. So again, I'm stating that this individual was born with an elongated head and genetically was not Homo sapiens sapiens. Then, as we get to the coast of Peru itself, the skull on the left is the most famous elongated skull in the world, and it is from the Paracas culture. Some people have labeled it as being Nephilim, others as Anunnaki, even others as alien-human hybrid, and even others as being alien. But you can't tell that unless you actually do DNA testing, which fortunately we were able to do. So this is an example of one of the nobility of the Paracas, and the shape is very complicated, and it is completely mummified, including having genetically red hair. So if you have genetically red hair, it's quite likely that you also have lighter colored skin than normal Native Americans, and you could also have had green or blue eyes. These are not the characteristics of indigenous people of Peru from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, because theoretically, outside genetics, as in European contribution to the genetic landscape, didn't happen until the arrival of the Spanish in about 1532 AD. And then we have a different design of skull. You see the back of this one is rounded, and so this was another class of nobility. It's quite possible that you had genetic variation in the ancient population here, and contrast those two with this shape. This is near the end of the time of the Paracas people. You see the flattening of the forehead and the flattening of the back of the skull. So this is where normal people, normal Homo sapiens sapiens, started to influence the design of the latter part of the Paracas period. And now the most dramatic example. Contrast this shape with that. So here we have cranial deformation, and here I believe this is a natural elongated head of the ancient Paracas people of Peru. Now we can contrast this design on the right with that of the left. That of the left is normal Homo sapiens sapiens. That on the right is vastly different. And then we start to look in finer detail. Here, the suture structure of Homo sapiens sapiens. You have these two suture lines, the coronal coming across, and then the parietal coming backwards this way. Every Homo sapiens sapiens that we know of has that suture structure. But when we look at the elongated skulls of Paracas, the sagittal suture running this way is simply missing. And medical professionals can't explain why that is. Then as well, on the front of the skull, we have what are called foramen. So in our lower jaw or mandible, we have mental foramen, and then there are others located on our face. That is where blood and nerve flow come out in order to feed nutrients, blood, oxygen, etc., to the front of the face because it's quite far away from the actual circulatory system in your neck. But what's curious about the Paracas ones is they have these foramen in the back of the skull. We don't have that. And so what that's telling us is that there's a relationship between the elongated skull and the path of nerve and blood flow. So that again is a genetic characteristic. Then also this extension down here is for the attachment of muscles. So this is what it looks like in a normal human skull. And in the Paracas, it's quite a bit larger. So that would mean muscle attachment, because of the shape and design of the elongated skull, was more complicated in the ancient Paracas people. Then we look at what's called the foramen magnum, and that is where your spinal column and circulatory system enters the bottom of your skull. As you can see, it's right in the center of balance in your skull, but with the Paracas, it's 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch back. So that is a genetic characteristic. And here we'll do a comparison between a normal skull on the right and two of the Paracas on the left. You'll also notice that the actual foramen magnum is much smaller, much narrower in the Paracas, and this indicates that their necks were longer than normal. And this is just another example of that. Also, blood testing has been done of 14 ancient Paracas. And in the literature, what it states is all native people who were and are full-blooded in Peru had or have solely 100% blood type O. But when studies were done in the 1970s of 14 different individuals based on blood taken from cloth from ancient tombs, 28.6% of the individuals were blood type A, 6.1% blood type B, 12.2% blood type AB, and only 53% blood type O. So that means a complex mixing of genetics on the coast of Peru long before the presence, supposedly, of any Europeans or any outsiders. We've also recently figured out that the end of the Paracas was caused by genocide. Some people moved in from the north and they obliterated or tried to obliterate the royal bloodline of the Paracas people and take over their land. So this, what you're seeing, is a killing field. All of these skulls were elongated, all the result of cranial deformation, so at the latter end of the Paracas period, and all having evidence of blows to the head, and the bones are simply scattered. The royal people of the Paracas would have been buried in a very careful manner. These were simply dumped in a pile and buried in a shallow nature. Many different examples of the genetic red hair can be found to this day, and in some cases, blonde hair. Once again, through time, through oxidation, etc., black hair cannot become red or blonde. So this is another genetic distinction. And now what's important is to get into the actual DNA analysis. So in terms of standard migration, supposedly all of the ancient Peruvians from pre-Columbian times, their ancestry comes from haplogroup B. And the source of that is Southeast Asia, and that is consistent with migrating across the Bering Land Bridge 12,000 plus years ago, and eventually migrating to the coast of Peru. However, when we did our DNA tests, the results became quite intriguing. Here we have, once again, the 18-month-old baby Paracas skull. Its maternal or mitochondrial haplogroup turned out to be U2E1, source of which is the Black Sea and the Caspian. And then the skull on the right-hand side, its haplogroup turns out to be T2, which again goes back to Europe or Eurasia. And then this one, its mitochondrial haplogroup is H1. It's found through Europe, but the source area is the Black Sea and Crimea. So it's highly unlikely of migration of people across land to Siberia, across the Bering Land Bridge, and all the way down the Americas to the coast of Peru. It's more likely maritime emigration 3000 BC or earlier. So again, another DNA test. The one on the left-hand side, H2A. Source, the Black Sea and Crimea. And then a more extensive series of testing. Again, the blood or the haplogroup we're expected to find in terms of mitochondrial is B. But instead, what we got from 17 different skulls, U2E1, U2E, H1, H, J1B1. Then some examples did show up, 4 examples of haplogroup B, as in B4, B4, then H and R, and H and B5. So the majority show ancestry not from the coast of Peru, not from migration through the Bering Land Bridge, but probable migration from the Black Sea and Caspian Sea areas, because that's where the other largest elongated skulls in the world have been found. The 2 locations in the world, the Black Sea and Caspian, Crimea area, and the coast of Peru. And the haplogroups confirm that. So here are some elongated skulls found in the Crimea, Black Sea area. And there you can see, in the case of the one on the right, there is an extra suture line coming down the forehead. That is consistent with what we also find in different locations in Peru. That is not normal in Homo sapiens sapiens. And very recently, a baby was found about 2 years old in Crimea, shown here, with the skull the size of the torso. Now this is an example of a drawing done in the 19th century from a baby, actually a fetus, found in Paracas. Notice the head is the size of the torso, the neck is longer than normal, it appears to have teeth at 7 to 9 months old in utero, so that obviously is a genetic anomaly, not Homo sapiens sapiens. And then this is a full skeleton found in the Lake Titicaca area. And you can see that the skull is much larger than normal. We're going to go back to study more in terms of abnormalities in the skeletal structure. But this was a female. I was fortunately with a radiologist from the United States when we found this little museum. And when he looked at this, his immediate reaction was, "That is not human." So what you can see from the evidence is that the idea that the Paracas people of the coast of Peru simply genetically evolved on the coast of Peru is highly suspicious. No academics that I know of want to study this subject. We have seen proof that in terms of their blood types, they were genetically and ethnically very complicated. Their skin tone may have been much lighter than normal native people of Peru. They may have had green eye color or blue eye color. They had genetically red hair. They may have very well migrated from almost halfway around the world.
Why does it matter that we connect the dots from the past? Because if we don't know who we are and where we come from, how could we possibly know where we are going? The world is covered in countless, unimaginable numbers of ancient, megalithic, ancient sites built by civilizations and people that we know nothing about. Every year, every month, every week, new sites are being discovered. And I know that Hugh Newman, for example, is one of those people that keeps discovering new, incredible sites. Some of the things he shared with me over the last few days just blew my mind. So we have no idea of what happened on this planet. We just literally are like babies waking up from a deep sleep, trying to figure out who we are, where we come from, and why we're here, while there's this unwritten, unknown history of our planet that probably goes back a lot further and is a lot more weird and strange and unimaginable that most of us could possibly fathom. And the amazing thing is that they did all this stuff with hammers, chisels, ropes, and pulleys. And this is what our historians are still trying to convince us of today. That is the most remarkable and unbelievable thing. Welcome to my part of the world and my life, to the stone circles and the vanished civilizations of southern Africa that left behind more than 10 million circular stone ruins that are absolutely spectacular only when you start looking at them from the air. Each one is completely unique, and some of them are very large, some of them are small, some of them look insignificant, some of them look like beautiful flowers, and you'll notice that they're all connected to each other by these channels. They do not stand alone. You'll notice that they have extended structures that are covered by soil that move away from the stone circles as we see them sticking out of the ground today. And it just goes on and on. What you're looking at is the largest cluster of stone ruins found anywhere in the world today. It makes everything else pale into insignificance. Sometimes they run for 100 by 100 kilometers, connected, all stone circles that are not standalone. They're all connected by channels and this weird spider's web effect that holds all of these circles and the channels together. And you just see the devastation and the destruction from some event that destroyed all of this a long, long time ago. And then a few of them have been rebuilt and restructured in more recent times. The key thing here is that there are no doors and entrances. So these cannot be dwellings for people or cows or other animals, because clearly they were not built with doors and entrances. They're something else. Archaeological drawings from 1939 clearly indicate that they have no doors and entrances, that they're circular structures all connected to each other by these channels, looking like a bunch of grapes here in this image. And sometimes these circles are concentric, connected to each other, all linking to each other. And that is all seated in a large network of agricultural terraces that cover at least 450,000 square kilometers in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Who built these terraces? What were they for? What were they growing? And who were they feeding? In the most recent research that I've found from Anton Parks, if you've not come across Anton Parks yet, I highly recommend that you get his books. They're now available in English. It is a whole new spin and a whole new level on Anunnaki activity. And not just Anunnaki, but many other ancient beings that were not necessarily as benevolent as the Anunnaki. A whole new look at the Sumerian language as a prototype language to pretty much every language in the world today. And in there he suggests that whatever was happening in southern Africa, they were growing huge amounts of food that were from there, they were feeding all the other groups of beings around the world from one central food growing area. And I'm suspecting that this is maybe this is why there are so many agricultural terraces, because they were feeding the beings, whether they were Anunnaki or other beings from around the world, from southern Africa. And these terraces cover entire mountains. Once you start walking around, people that have been on my Stone Circle research journeys with me now, we've just had the second one, you realize the extent of this. It literally makes your jaw just drop down with wonder and amazement how vast this is. The flagship among all these ruins in southern Africa, unquestionably, has become known as Adam's Calendar. This site was rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003, 2004. It is now, as far as I know, the oldest example, or an example of the oldest working sun calendar. It still works. As you can see, the shadow of the rock closest to us casts a shadow on the calendar stone, and it moves from the left to the right, from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, and when it reaches the right edge of that calendar stone, it comes back. So you can still tell every day of the year based on the setting of that sun and the shadow, where the shadow lands. Credo Mutwa's famous Zulu shaman started to weep when I showed him the book, Adam's Calendar, in 2008. He said he never thought he'd see that special place again because he was initiated there in 1937. He then proceeded to tell me what a sacred and important place it was in all of human history. And he said it was known as Inzalo Yilanga, or birthplace of the sun, in Zulu shamanic tradition, where humanity was created by the gods to be the slaves in the gold mines. So this is information that's well recorded, knowledge handed down for thousands of years among African shamans, as always completely ignored by mainstream academia and historians. But nothing could have prepared me for the discovery of January 2018, when my first Stone Circle research team accidentally discovered the mud fossils of giants and other creatures. And there you can see a collection of many of the fossils. Here we have a shoulder blade. We got one rib here. There's another beautiful elongated rib. And there are just all kinds of body parts that completely and utterly metamorphosize. Now, here is one of the best examples. There's a heart. You can clearly see the aorta, where the aorta goes at the top. You see the coronary artery crossing the heart. This is about 3 times the size of a human heart. So this could possibly fit the shape of an Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki were 3 times the size or twice the size of humans, that could be an Anunnaki heart. Completely fossilized, metamorphosized into Hornfels rock. This is a huge problem for geology and metallurgy and chemistry. It seems that when these body parts get trapped in mud and water, they completely and utterly transmutate and transform from whatever organ it was or body part with the internal structure. It completely metamorphosizes into very dense crystalline rock called Hornfels in geological terms. When these fossils break and you look at the internal structure, you can't see internal structure. This is the mystery. Only when you look carefully, you start seeing some indications of weird things going on. And you'll see what I mean in a second. But just to the untrained eye, when any of these fossils break, it just looks like black rock, known as Hornfels or ringstone. I was standing with his heart in my hand, and this couple pulled up, a guy and his wife, and he ran up and he said, "Hey, Michael, how's it going? I've been watching your videos." And he looked at me and said, "Is that a heart you're holding?" And I go, "Yeah, well, I think it's a heart." He goes, "Well, it is a heart. I'm a surgeon. That's a bloody heart." And I go, "Wow, you're a surgeon?" "Yeah, I'm a surgeon at the Johannesburg Gen." So I said, "Wow, hey, would you mind just going on video and telling me a bit about some of these body parts?" So I've got about a 5-minute video or more, but like 10-minute video clip of him going around telling me what these different body parts are. So it was a really beautifully timed moment. And since then, there have been many doctors and physicians and people that understand human anatomy, and their jaws literally fall to the ground when they see what fills the museum. That is where the shoulder blade was lying. I've been driving past this for 10 years. 10 years. Didn't see it. You know, that's that expression, once I was blind, but now I can see. It's at least twice the size of a human leg bone, a human joint there. Look at that. Compared to that, when you see it in real life, it's a lot more impressive. And then you start seeing footprints like this that has become far more interesting. This is a close-up of the reptilian skin on one of them. And this is my favorite one, where you can actually see the skin at the top and how the epithelial cells are growing up into the skin before they actually reach the top. This entire thing is one piece of Hornfels rock, completely and utterly metamorphosized. You cannot distinguish internal organs in any possible way. That is a huge cognitive dissonance problem we're going to have to come across, because we don't understand how that works. So, the mud fossils of giants and weird creatures have suddenly taken the spotlight off the stone circles and the vanished civilizations, because they seem to be everywhere. And we now have to put this into context of what we're dealing with here. We've got this vast civilization with all these terraces everywhere, growing huge amounts of food, millions of stone circles, and now this on top of it? What the hell is going on? So, what the stone circles are just cymatic patterns representing the shape of the sound coming out of the ground at that specific place. That's it. So what these ancients knew, or the Anunnaki knew at this stage, I believe the Anunnaki were the ones that built all these, is they knew how to identify the shape of the sound frequency coming out at that specific place, and they placed the rocks on the shape of the cymatic pattern of the sound, in which case they basically amplified those sound frequencies. So they created an amplification structure. So cymatic patterns, that's why each stone circle is completely unique, none are ever the same, and this is why we started measuring very powerful frequencies in the gigahertz, sound frequencies coming out of the walls, and electromagnetic fields coming out of the walls, from 400 megahertz all the way up to 1800 megahertz at Adam's calendar. It is quite spectacular. Adam's calendar is a mystery, because the stone circles we can figure out, and we can understand how they amplify the sound frequencies because of the stones and the walls and the quartz. So it's the quartz in the rocks, in the stones, in the walls that do the vibration and the amplification. And the sound moves, and the moving sound then creates magnetic fields, and the moving magnetic fields create the electromagnetic fields. So, but Adam's calendar has got no walls. And yet it is infinitely more powerful than any of the stone circles. So something else is going on there. There's another mechanism at work there. And there we measured way beyond 375 gigahertz. The guy who was measuring it said he couldn't measure it any higher, but it indicates that it goes a lot higher than that. And then 1700 megahertz electromagnetic field running horizontally, and another one running vertically out of it. So we definitely have the indication of a toroidal field there. A toroidal vortex field that's being generated at Adam's calendar itself. And we have these weird flower-shaped ruins that actually are magnetrons, giant magnetrons built out of quartz. And I asked two magnetron scientists, how much energy would a magnetron 40 or 50 meters in diameter generate built out of pure quartz? And the answer was more than all the power plants on Earth today. So, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. The point is we have thousands of these magnetron-type structures built out of quartz, all connected to each other into that giant grid, creating this huge energy grid of stone circles, magnetrons, generating insane amounts of energy, pulling it together and doing something. And that's the question. What were they using all that energy for? It couldn't have just been gold mining. I guess some of it was used for gold mining, but I'm now starting to think that they were possibly manipulating the weather, geoengineering, creating a climate, creating oxygen, putting more oxygen into the atmosphere, something like that, because this is such a gigantic initiative, such a gigantic scale infrastructure that they created. It had to be something to do, it had to have something to do with much more than just mining gold. And you'll see as we go into the magnetics and understanding magnetism and how these are connected to magnetic fields, how that could have also been used to possibly create oxygen out of sucking up water from the rivers, because many of the channels from the stone circles actually run and they end up in the river. They just run and end in the river. And this has puzzled me for years and years. But now I'm starting to figure out different aspects of this. In your mind, the more information you get, obviously, the more the different your conclusions are that you reach. So the stone circles are not the only ancient energy generating devices. It seems that to me that most ancient sites are actually energy generating devices, and we need to remind ourselves that they're made of stones, and especially the stone circles are made of stones that ring like bells. And these stones have high crystal content, and crystal content means quartz, quartzite, crystal, silica. This is all materials that conduct sound and conduct light. This is all the stuff that we use in the most advanced silicon-based technology today. And we also need to remind ourselves that digital data can be stored in crystals, in quartz crystals. But obviously that's not being used in the technology world today, because otherwise they just give the game away. You know, once we can start storing digital data in our crystals, then the whole, you don't have to go and buy the crappy storage devices anymore. Because you get one crystal and thank you for life. It's virtually infinite amount of information in there. So what we need to start doing is looking at stones as living, conscious entities, organisms. They store knowledge and information. They conduct sound and light. They have essence and consciousness imbued in them. Rocks are not just inanimate objects, and this is why ancient cultures and these guys in the ancient times used stone in its original form. They didn't have to extract the active ingredient to put it into a crappy little flashy box to sell it to somebody, because they didn't have money. They didn't do this as commercial entity or commercial enterprise. They were doing this to help themselves on a planet they were trying to make habitable for themselves. So they used rock in its original shape and for everything they needed to use it for. So all these ancient structures built from rock are just giant machines, and using the quartz and the crystal and the silica inside the way that it should be used, as resonators, energy-generating devices, using light and sound to activate it. And this is why most of these seem to be aligned to the solstices, equinoxes, movement of the sun, and often movement of the stars. So when the sun comes up over there, and the rays of this rising sun comes down a passage and hits a standing stone down a passage, the light and the sound of the frequency of that light hits the standing stone. It's like hitting enter on a computer. It activates the machine to start doing whatever that machine was constructed to do. And then the sun moves, and on another solstice over there, it comes down a different passage and the first morning light hits another standing stone, and that machine gets instructions to stop doing what it was doing and do something else. And possibly that's what happens with the movement of the stars as well. When they go down these weird shafts and etc., they activate the light and the sound frequencies of that light, of the starlight and the sunlight and possibly the moonlight, are the activators to switch on these ancient machines. So they built them without having to have human or intelligent intervention, just operated by the movement of the sun, the moon, or the stars. And we know that they're active because photographs like this tell us that they're still active. Obviously, we know this from the stone circles in South Africa. We've measured many of them. The sound frequencies are insane. Even Stonehenge, the beautiful concentric properties that have been measured in Stonehenge show us that it's strong acoustic properties that were created by intent, not by accident. And I believe, just like everything else, Stonehenge was a very powerful energy-generating device, a huge, powerful resonator, and much, much older than we can imagine. I was there with Hugh yesterday, and just to confirm what I saw in 2010 when I was there for the first time, and my jaw nearly dropped when I saw the big, tall stone that fell over, the two tall stones, one of them fell over and broke, and I was told over and over again, yes, that stone fell and broke. And I pointed out to the people, look, if that stone fell over and broke and is only a few thousand years old, then that break should be a reasonably clean break, a sharp edge. Well, that's not the case. That break on that stone has erosion that's about half a meter, about, a foot this way and a foot that way. Erosion, I'm sorry, but sarsen stone, a dolerite stone of that hardness, will not erode half a meter in a few thousand years. So either they're lying to us about those stones and that stone did not fall and break, or if it is that stone that fell and broke, that Stonehenge is more than 1 million years old. It's just a very old, mysterious place. The geology is not going to lie to us. Our historians will, our geologists will, our archaeologists will lie to us, But the geology is not lying to us. The erosion is there. You can't wish it away. So think about Stone Age in a very different light. Next time you go there, check out the erosion on that stone. The ancient sites are just basically advanced technology on a gigantic scale. And we've never been able to see it because most of us don't really get images, or we don't see these ancient sites from the air, like the stone circles. When you stand next to it and you walk in these temples in Egypt, it's so overwhelming and so mesmerizing that we don't really see the wood for the trees. But when you start looking at it from the air, everything changes. And when I was there again in 2012, I realized that these obelisks are just like antennae. They ring like bells, like the stones in my museum I've been collecting. They're beautiful. They ring so perfectly. And when you look at these temples in Egypt, they're just too many pillars, not enough space. It's obviously not meant to come and kiss butt of some king or some god and offer food and come there for forgiveness and all. It's just, it's the wrong shape, the wrong size, too many pillars. Why? And when you start looking at it from the air, you realize what it's all about. It's not about worshiping and offering food and that. And you start seeing what's going on. And resonating, vibrating pillars on beautiful platforms, acoustic chambers, and very quickly you realize that these are just templates for gigantic circuit boards, gigantic energy circuit boards on a scale that we could not have imagined. And because they did this in times where money did not restrict what they were trying to achieve. They did what they had to do to either inhabit a planet or survive or create a result that they were looking for. Microprocessors become giant macroprocessors. And this is one of my favorite images. You can just imagine what historians are telling us about the kind of worshipping that used to go in these places here. Oh, yeah, no, those are major places of worship. Really? Yeah. And the pyramid is just a beautiful example of the same thing. It just carries on. And Angkor Wat, I mean, there you got the combination of quartz and water, the two most abundant elements on Earth, that both contain memory, conduct light and sound. Sacsay Huaman is another great example of just a circuit board on top of a mountain. This is not a mountaintop fortress, clearly built for other reasons, that was possibly inhabited in more recent times and used by more recent civilizations, just like the stone circles. That some of the most recent civilizations used it. They created doors and entrances in so they could use it for themselves and for their cows or whatever, but not the original architects. That's not what it was built for. Borobudur, Indonesia, I mean, this is just ridiculous. Literally, if you see photographs from right above, it looks like it's alive. It's actually, the photograph looks like it moves when you look at it. And then, obviously, on top of it, it's a dead giveaway. These giant bells with these antennae going up into the sky, and it's always antenna going up into the sky. And the electromagnetic universe is actually a subtle deception. You'll understand as we go why I say this. It's a very subtle deception, a very important subtle deception, because it's not the electromagnetic universe that we live in. It's the magneto-electric universe that we live in. And just twisting those two around would have given us a very different perception while we grow up about the world that we live in and the universe and this reality of us, if we don't think of it as the electromagnetic but the magneto-electric. Huge consciousness shift in growing up with that kind of thinking. Everything has its own specific frequency, as we mentioned before. Prime resonance frequency. Magnetrons obviously generate huge amounts of energy, and that's just sound. It's a resonant cavity magnetron. Resonant cavity magnetron that's used in laser beams, laser technology, microwaves, all use magnetrons for that technology. Sound is the ultimate source of free energy. Nikola Tesla knew this, and I believe that this is how he constructed his energy device. Because he knew that the earth rings like a bell. He talks about it. He tapped into the sound of the earth, just like the guys that built the stone circles tapped into the sound of the earth. And he used that. He could transmit that and use that whichever way he wanted. Magnets create sound. We all know how speakers work, right? And how speaker magnets work. And the flow of energy, either from an electronic source from the plug and creates the moving sound, or vice versa. The moving sound actually moves a magnet and creates an electronic thing going the other way. It works both ways. So sound and magnetism are inextricably connected. Sound creates magnetic fields, and moving magnetic fields create electricity. And therefore we live in a magneto-electric universe, not an electromagnetic universe. And in there is that subtle deception I was talking about. Luckily, Nikola Tesla comes along, and he makes it very clear, along with a whole number of great minds, that if you want to find out the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. There are no particles, says Mr. Tesla. In fact, even the electron seems to be a fictitious particle. And this now starts to get very interesting. This is supposed to be a picture of an electron riding on a beam of light. Can you see anything physical there? I see ripples in a pond. I've just dropped a pebble in a pond and I see ripples in a pond, right? That's what it looks like. And that's exactly what it is. So Nikola Tesla tells us that in this interview in 1928, it says that he disagrees with the accepted atomic theory of matter and does not believe in the existence of an electron as pictured by science. Tesla goes further and says that the secret of the universe lies in the beauty of 3, 6, and 9. And anyone that studies the number 3, 6, and 9 will know very quickly that these are the fundamental numbers in vortex maths. Vortex maths is all around 3, 6, and 9. Toroidal fields, vortex, toroidal fields, same thing. Toruses are vortexes, create vortexes. Vortex math is all about studying toroidal fields or donut-shaped stones. Planting a little seed with you. Even Albert Einstein had a problem with the electron. He couldn't understand how the electron could exist with his own understanding of the subatomic particle energetics. I'm not going to read that because it's really confusing the way he states it. But basically he says he can't understand how an electron can exist. And then one of my favorite, Edward Leeds Scullin, the man that built Coral Castle in southern Florida, single-handedly built those huge giant blocks, cut them out, put them on top of each other. 1 hectare of giant 30-ton blocks of coral rock. He says millions of people all over the world are being fooled by the non-existing electrons. Thomson invented an imaginary baby and called it an electron. Rutherford adopted it, and now the men with the long hair are nursing it. Dr. Manjir Samantha Lawton, that I met in Manchester several years in 2013, wrote this amazing book, and I highly recommend you read it. It reads like a novel. You won't put it down once you start. It's one of my favorite books ever read. Punk Science, where she clearly shows how everything in physics, in science, in biology, everywhere manifests in toroidal fields. Everything is a toroidal field or a torus. Everything starts out as a torus, and especially sound. Sound being the primordial source of everything. And even color manifests in toroidal shapes and toroidal fields, toruses. Color, because every color has a frequency to it, and every frequency has a sound to it. Light, every light frequency has a sound frequency attached to it, and therefore it is also a torus. So magnetic fields create toroidal shapes. You can even see it if you put a magnet down like this, and the iron filings clearly show the toroidal shape immediately. But the perfectly balanced toroidal shape, or the balanced magnetic torus, looks like this. And once again, I think we've been fooled by being taught about positive and negative, because in the perfectly balanced magnetic field, there seems to be no positive and negative. It seems to be the same charge working in opposite direction, one coming from the top and the other one coming from the bottom. And this is really interesting. That needs to be discussed and investigated a lot more. So this is the torus spinning from the top down and from the bottom up in opposing directions, the same energetic field. And where they meet in the middle, where that bright green dot is in the middle, that is what some people refer to as the 0 point, or as Nassim Haramein calls it, the vacuum. And this is where I bring you to the tools and artifacts in my museum that I've been collecting from the ancient ruins in southern Africa, giving us a very clear indication that these ancient people were using this technology, toroidal stones, torus stones, with cone-shaped tools to do all this amazing stuff that our archaeologists are still telling us that these the stone toruses and cones. Our archaeologists are still telling us that these stones were made by people in the Stone Age as weights for digging sticks. I don't even know what to say to those people. And this is important to realize, when Caesar technology was first introduced to us, only in 2009 was Caesar technology introduced to humankind, and this is when the cone-shaped technology becomes important, when sound is propelled into a Caesar beam. So what happens when you put sound into a cone? It speeds up, speeds up, speeds up. By the time it leaves the tip, it is moving faster than the speed of light. It becomes what's known as hypersound and a Caesar. And that sound, as that sound frequency enters the 0 point of the toroidal field, at which point it basically creates this infinitely fast Caesar beam. What happens to that Caesar beam? That Caesar beam is surrounded by incredibly powerful magnetic fields because of the toroidal nature of that Caesar beam. We have these beautiful cone-shaped tools in the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose that are engraved with cuneiform text that tell us that these cones were used in the construction of the temples of Sumer. Now, how would you use a cone in the construction of the temple of Sumer? And one of them mentions the temple of Inanna being built with these cone-shaped tools. And then to the rescue comes Ed Leeds Scullin, the man that built Coral Castle, this incredible place at the southern Florida. And he was seen levitating those giant blocks with ice cream cones in his hands. And this is why I call it the ice cream cone phenomenon. Just like that Mayan dude with 2 ice cream cones, he was seen holding 2 ice cream cones levitating those giant blocks. I hope that this is starting to, provide a really interesting body of interesting evidence of how this stuff works. And that brings us to dragonflies and other beetles and bugs whose bodies are too big for their wings. Those are not blood vessels in the dragonfly. Those are hollow tubes. And the dragonfly doesn't flap its wings like a bird. It vibrates them and buzzes them. It's the buzzing of those wings, the sound of those wings that goes into the tubes, the hollow tubes. And at the bottom of those hollow tubes, there are hundreds of tiny little cones. So the sound frequency goes out of the cones, creating these toroidal fields around the butterflies and the dragonfly's wings, putting them into a state of gravity-free zone around them because of the cone-shaped technology in their wings. And then we get back to the torus stones that emit powerful sound and frequencies. We've measured sound energies coming out of the torus stones, very, very powerful frequencies. Some of them give us up to 3,400 decibels of sound. That's very, very powerful stuff. Very high frequencies. You can't hear it, but it affects your body. Also, what I've been noticing is that these torus stones can act as intentional tools. If you put your intention into it, it amplifies your thoughts, amplifies your intentions, these torus stones. So they could be very good or very dangerous. And basically, like we said, it's scalar technology, scalar vortex torus effect. As it goes in, it goes into that infinite vacuum, the density of the vacuum, and then creates a bigger torus around it. And this happens simultaneously because of that infinite density of that vacuum, that 0 point. We put one of these torus stones in a bucket of water. The next morning, there were thousands of bubbles going around, spiraling into the center of the torus stone. We've only done this once, but once is good enough for me. So I packed this in bubble wrap and threw it in my hand luggage, and we left for Chicago via Doha, Qatar. This is Arab airport on steroids, all the latest technology. And when we got onto the airplane to go to Chicago, we got delayed, and we were like 20 minutes late. And eventually, they called my partner off the plane, and we got to the door, and the thing was gone already, that spacewalk thing, and there was a staircase going down, and suddenly I saw it was my bag there. So they cross-labeled our bags. So I walked down thinking, oh my God, my stone is in the bag. It's the stone. What am I going to tell them? I can't tell them this is ancient advanced technology. This is not going to go down well. So I think, okay, it's African arts and crafts. Cool, African arts and crafts. So I get down there and I'm really nervous. There are 5 guys with guns, and I'm sweating, so I'm hoping that their fingers aren't sweating on the trigger. and open my bag. They open your bag, there's a security thread in your bag. So I open my bag, and I know it's a stone, so I go straight and I pull out the stone. It's wrapped in bubble wrap and packing tape. I have no idea how I opened it, because it's virtually impossible to open that with your bare fingers. You know what I mean? It's like, and somehow I opened it and it popped out. I said, you see, it's a stone from my friend in Hawaii, and African arts and crafts. And there was one African guy there that leaned over. He didn't have a gun, and he leaned over their shoulders, and he said, oh, I've seen one of those before. And I only realized months later that he probably diffused the tension. When I got back on the plane, so they said, okay, good, put it back in your bag, and bag goes on the plane. I get back on the plane, sit down, and when I sit down, my partner says to me, when the captain came out of the cockpit, he said, whatever is in that bag crashed the TSA security system. So it came from the captain. It didn't come from me or anybody else. The captain volunteered that information to us. So we have the USA, TSA, Homeland Security to thank for proving scientifically that we're dealing with ancient advanced technology. What happened here? The Taurus stone that crashed the TSA security system was lying 3 meters away from that stone. When I removed that Taurus stone, it stopped cracking. A year ago, I brought new Taurus stones. I put them underneath the broken pieces, and within a few months, it started cracking again. So the Taurus stones have a profound influence, and it's breaking and cracking this Klerksdorp sphere. Creator Mutwa told me that these Klerksdorp spheres were originally sources of light, that they would light up, brilliant light would come out of them like a light bulb if it was exposed to certain subtle frequencies. At first I thought he was crazy. Now I'm beginning to think that maybe he was right.
We are living through the most extraordinary moment in human history. After decades of denial and ridicule, government officials and the mainstream media are admitting that extraterrestrial civilizations are visiting Earth. But there's a twist. The same people and institutions who lied about ETs and just about everything else are now framing the extraterrestrial presence as a threat.
And we are seriously thinking of the Space Force.
One man has been trying to warn us about this for decades.
On the surface, UFOs are real, there are these machines zipping through the sky. But one of the things I've always said is, well, that's interesting, and it's cool, and it's great to see them. But what's really interesting are the people on board those spacecraft. They're intelligent, they're conscious, they're here, they're interested. Why are they here otherwise? But no one has made the question, how do we develop that relationship with the occupants of the UFOs? That's what this is about. It's going from just sort of a materialistic view, there's a machine flying around the sky, and sort of a superficial view of it, to a deeper truth of who's on board, why are they here? What is their relationship to humanity, perhaps the origins of the human race? What are we to do to create a relationship with them, and how do we do that? What is the foundation of a relationship between humans at this stage of our evolution and civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to millions of years more developed technologically and socially and perhaps in consciousness? We have to find where that point of commonality is. I have put a briefing together for every president since Bill Clinton, and to the extent that they know anything, it doesn't mean they have control over these covert programs. The unacknowledged special access projects are run in a way that they are outside the purview and control of the president or the Congress. And for that reason, our elected representatives are unlikely to resolve this problem. But we can resolve it by going directly to these civilizations and saying, we're here. You can make contact with us. We're unarmed. We are friendly.
Since 1990, a network of free thinkers and renegades have been bypassing the national security state to make direct contact with advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. Using the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols, or CE5, developed by Dr. Greer. This has proven to be the most subversive and dangerous information he has released to the public.
Oh my gosh.
Dude, this is UFO type shit right now, man. And Tom Ball, look at this shit right now. Oh my God, look at this. These three lights, they keep coming together and then they fucking go apart. Watch this. Look at it. Look at that. Look at it. Dude, what the hell? There goes one. Now they've got the two lights. Oop, there it goes. Boom.
Close Encounters of the First Kind consists of visual sightings of an unidentified flying object. Close Encounters of the Second Kind, some physical trace is present, like impressions in the ground or scorched vegetation. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the occupants or pilots of an ET craft are witnessed. Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, a human is brought on board an ET craft. Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, proactive, human-initiated communication with extraterrestrial beings. Most of the phenomena presented in this film were photographed or recorded during a CE5 contact event. For thousands of people, contact has begun. This is their story.
Look, there's four. There's four. Holy damn hot shit. Hot dog. Come on, buddy, don't go away.
This got on the radar of the intelligence community, and they knew that we had come across the Rosetta Stone of contacting and communicating with interstellar civilizations, and it worked. That is what started the intelligence community coming after what we were saying and doing and trying to intercept it. This is, in fact, cosmic disobedience on a grand scale. We're going to bypass the sociopaths in these covert programs and do this directly. It's the same thing with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement would have never happened from the top down. Even the Kennedy brothers did not want to step into that mess. It took a mass of people, not just Martin Luther King, but millions of people all over the country doing sit-ins and lunch counter sit-ins and buses and what have you to change that direction of our civilization out of Jim Crow onto a society that is, while not perfect, is more open and inclusive than it was. Well, the same has to happen here. And to do that, we have to understand what cosmic consciousness is and what the nature of the cosmic mind is that is resonating within every single human being. Because that's the foundation for the relationship between humans and these civilizations. By doing it directly, all of us are going to know what the truth is. You don't have to go through a proxy or someone who's telling you secondhand. But it also creates a movement globally to show these civilizations that there are people on this planet who are enlightened and conscious and peaceful, which is the majority of humans. Because real disclosure is humans making contact with these civilizations directly. And these civilizations are waiting for us to do it. And so this is our opportunity. This is our moment. And it really is we, the people, that have to do it.